The Code of Hammurabi is nearly 4,000 years old. It regulates marriage, dowries, inheritance, in obsessive detail. It never once specifies a minimum age to marry. Not because ancient Babylon didn't think about age. Because the question we're asking, how old is old enough, wasn't the question they were asking at all. So what were they asking instead? And why did that question, for most of human history, get answered so much younger than it does now? That's what we're figuring out today. Let's be precise about what this video is and isn't. This isn't a things were better back then video. It's not nostalgia. What we're doing is applying anthropology and demography to a genuinely uncomfortable historical fact. For most of human history, people married and had children far younger than almost anywhere considers acceptable today. And here's the reframe. The ancient world wasn't being callous. It simply hadn't yet invented the idea of childhood as something to protect. To understand why, we need three lenses: mortality, biology, and law. Let's start with the one that explains almost everything else. Here's the number that explains more than anything else in this video. Life expectancy at birth in most pre-industrial societies hovered around 25 to 35 years. That number is misleading on its own, so let's fix it. It's dragged down by catastrophic infant and child mortality. In many pre-industrial populations, something like a third to half of children didn't reach adulthood. If you survive to 15, your remaining life expectancy jumped substantially. But here's the part that matters for this video. Even adjusted for that, adult life was still short and unpredictable. Disease, childbirth complications, famine, violence, what demographers call extrinsic mortality, kept adult lifespans compressed. When death is that unpredictable and that close, the entire logic of reproduction shifts. Anthropologists studying this use a framework called life history theory. The idea that organisms, humans included, allocate their limited biological budget between growth, reproduction, and survival, based on the mortality environment around them. In a high mortality world, the evolved and cultural strategy converges on the same answer: reproduce earlier, reproduce more, because waiting is a bet you might not get to make. That's the demographic pressure. Next, did the biology even line up? Here's the twist most people don't expect. Biologically, ancient bodies were often less ready for reproduction younger than we assume, not more. Menarche, the onset of a girl's first menstrual cycle, is strongly linked to nutrition and body fat percentage. In well-nourished modern populations, menarche now averages around 12 to 13. In most pre-industrial and ancient populations, chronic caloric stress, disease burden, and physical labor pushed that average meaningfully later, commonly estimated in the 15 to 17 range in nutritionally stressed populations. This is a critical point, so let's be exact. Early legal marriageability and early biological fertility were often not the same thing. Betrothal or marriage could happen well before consummation or childbearing was expected, a distinction many pre-modern legal codes were explicit about. That gap, between legally married and biologically or socially expected to reproduce, is where a lot of modern confusion about this topic comes from. Roman law set 12 as the minimum legal age for a girl's marriage. But Roman sources themselves show that actual first cohabitation was frequently later, often mid to late teens among the elite, where we have the best records, with the legal minimum functioning more like a floor for betrothal and property arrangements than a norm for when marriages were consummated. Where women's bodies represented a family's political and economic alliance, marriage timing was a family decision, not an individual one. The very concept of individual consent, as we use it today, mostly didn't apply to marriage for anyone, of any age, in most of these societies. Marriage was a contract between households. That's an important distinction, and it points us towards something even bigger than mortality. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, from an evolutionary standpoint. Humans are one of the only species where females routinely live decades past their reproductive years. Most animals don't do this, so why do we? The leading explanation is called the grandmother hypothesis, developed largely through the work of anthropologist Kristen Hawkes. The idea: post-reproductive women who kept helping raise grandchildren, gathering food, providing care, improved those children's survival odds enough that evolution favored long post-menopausal lifespans. This connects to a second concept: alloparenting, child rearing distributed across a network of relatives, not concentrated in a single nuclear family. In most ancient and pre-industrial societies, a young mother wasn't raising a child alone. She was one node in a support network of grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, and community members. That matters enormously for this topic because it changes what early motherhood actually meant structurally. A 15-year-old mother in a dense allo-parenting network is not the same situation, socially or in terms of child outcomes, as a 15-year-old mother isolated without support. The demographic system was, in a sense, built to absorb early childbearing, which doesn't make it safe, but it explains how these societies functioned at all despite it. Which brings us to the part of this video we can't skip past. None of this is a defense. Everything we've covered explains why early marriage and childbearing were widespread. It does not mean they were safe or that the girls involved were unharmed by them. Modern medicine, psychology, and developmental science are unambiguous on this point. Adolescent bodies carry substantially higher risks in pregnancy and childbirth, and modern research on brain development shows that emotional and cognitive maturation continues well into a person's 20s. Ancient societies had no access to any of that knowledge. We do. So the honest version of this video's argument is, ancient societies weren't monstrous for doing this. They were operating inside a mortality and resource environment that made early reproduction a rational survival strategy, reinforced by law and enforced by family economics. But explainable and acceptable by today's standards are two different words, and this video is only making the case for the first one. That distinction is the whole point of doing history like this. So what actually flipped this? 3 things, roughly in order. Mortality dropped, nutrition improved, and economies changed. As child and adult mortality fell, through sanitation, medicine, and food security, the evolutionary and economic logic for early reproduction weakened. Parents no longer needed to front-load reproduction against the risk of dying young. At the same time, industrializing economies created a new reason to delay marriage. Extended education and job training became more valuable than early household labor. Childhood stopped being a brief prelude to adult work and started being an investment period. The short version, the age at which we now say someone is ready for marriage or consent, isn't an arbitrary modern preference. It tracks a real, measurable shift in mortality, nutrition, and how long human development actually takes when a society can afford to let it happen. Here's the thing about looking at history this way. It's tempting to read the past as either a golden age or a monstrous one. Neither is right. Ancient societies weren't following different morals about children. They were solving a brutal mortality problem with the only tools they had, and children absorbed the cost of that solution. We didn't get more virtuous since then. We got safer, and the protections we now have, the ones that push marriage and consent ages far later than almost any point in ancient history, exist because we finally had the survival margin to afford them. That's not something to take for granted. If you want the follow-up to this, how those legal ages actually changed, country by country, over the last 200 years, that's coming. Subscribe if you want to catch it, and I'll see you in the next one.